Excellent. So maybe I'll kick us off because I think I'm the one that kind of pushed the point with Malia to get this set up. And thank you, Malia, for inviting us, me, Peter, and Nihil, to go over DBT. And as I was talking with Malia, we generally need to get faster about shipping insights, essentially, and shipping data products and getting value into stakeholders' hands generally. And there are a lot of different ways to accomplish that. One way in particular why we're here today is to have functional analytics teams contribute directly to the DBT project, our data repo. We have the marketing analytics team, Robert in particular. He's an analytics engineer. He contributes heavily to the DBT repo. That helps them go faster. Carolyn and Emma on product analytics team, Matthew, they contribute to the product side of the repo, and that's in the common schemas too. So that helps them go quicker. The engineering team with Clement, he contributes as well. They're mainly in the workspace, but that helps them go faster too. And otherwise, the enterprise data team, in my opinion, we're a bottleneck right now, and stuff just takes a long time to ship. And it's just because the backlog is just so huge and massive, and we've got less than one person per division assigned. I've got 8 analytics engineers on the team, and it ends up being less than one person per functional area, while each functional area can have 5, 6 analysts, and then they have all these people that are asking them for stuff. And then it comes back to like one person assigned to one domain, and then they're spread thin. And so we found that when functional teams can contribute to the project, that's a win-win, and it helps everyone go faster. And as much as we can collaborate to do it according to the repo standards and architecture of the repo, the guidelines, which Peter's going to walk us through today, that's even better. So I was talking with Malia and said, hey, Malia, you know what? Like, you have this big backlog of analytics stuff that you need to kind of push to production and get certified. For a lot of it, if your team could make the report table in the common mart restricted schema, just use the certified data source, don't wait for my team to do it, you could just go a lot faster. And of course, we need to be mindful of SSOT. And that's when the maintainer of the project, which the maintainers are on the data team, we should be helping with that. So that's the context. So we came here, Malia was like, all right, I like that plan. I like the sound of that. So
Oh wait, just to add one more
go ahead,
thing.
Malia. Yes.
Another thing, Keith, you know how you were like, had that situation where you want to push data into Salesforce, and I was like, well, do you have it in a Snowflake table? Because if you do, then we could do something with it. And if you don't, if it's just, you know, a spreadsheet or a query, I don't have an easy way to get that into Salesforce. It's another use case for DBT. If you can plop it in a table, then we can move it around more easily. All right, go ahead.
Absolutely. Great call out, Malia. And kind of my thinking is we'd want to count the work that I would expect you all to start with and what we've seen other functional teams do. I would calibrate it to an associate or intermediate level analytics engineer DBT work. We're not asking, I don't think to start anyway. If somebody on the team, y'all wanted to go like to Noel's level, super advanced, that, you know, but do it in our architecture and governance, that's all good. But we're really talking about like that first level reporting, semantic layer level of just to kind of get your stuff going. And then that would help free up more time for the full-time analytics engineers to go on the deeper, more dense stuff, the stuff that elevates the whole system, those foundational SSOT things, data quality things, trying to clean up the models, etc. And then maybe the senior and the staff analytics engineer kind of works on some of those. So that it would just be helpful to do that. Yeah, and that's why we're here. So I mentioned to Malia, like, so Peter's been working on making it easier to use DBT. And I said, Malia, man, there's a way you could do it like all in the web IDE. I was like, that's possible. But then Peter also, he's made it easier to work with locally. So let's have Peter come in and just show us our latest thinking and operating procedures on working with DBT, like soup to nuts, and then show the team different ways to work with DBT. And then of course we'd be here to support and enable you all to do that. And I do believe it's a win-win, because for the sales revenue strategy and analyst, that's a great thing to put on your resume, a great skill set in this modern data stack, that you can work with DBT, you can, do some modeling, so I think it's a win-win. Okay, so with that, any questions on the context or while we're here? That was a bit long-winded, but wanted to share that as a part of my my improvement, to like talk more about strategy and why we're doing stuff. Okay, very good. Keep this hype, my guy. This is good. Okay, Peter. So with that, I'll hand the floor over to Peter. Well, I'd love to introduce you all to Peter, staff analytics engineer, and he's our expert on architecture, systems, process, efficiency. He loves all those things, making all those things better. So I said, I know the guy to call for this. So Peter, with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Cool. Hopefully I live up to the hype. I apologize. I live next to a military Air Force base, and they're doing training right now. So if you hear it, it's loud enough that it could come through the mic. So just be prepared. If I static out, that it's just a jet flying overhead. So I wanted to actually kind of give full context of, I want to kind of give a primer on the data warehouse, because understanding some of these little bits of context helps understand and fill in the gaps of why are we doing something or how we do something. But I want you to know that I'm planning to walk through a live demo of adding a column to a model and showing you how all that works in the Web IDE. That's coming. So you can be prepared for that. It's straightforward. It's simple. I can even walk you through. I'll be even planning to walk through how that looks locally if you wanted to set up a local development environment. But I wanted to give some context first so that you can kind of fill that in. It can be as easy as using the GitLab Web IDE, editing one file, and hitting 2 buttons. That's as simple as it could be, depending on what you need to do. That's in the simplest case, and it of course scales up from there.
That's my level now. I can click the 2 buttons. That's about as far as I can
click
get.
the 2 buttons, and that's all you need. That's fine. But let me give you the context of it. I'll share my screen for a little bit. I have put links into a couple of the things that I'm going to share. And I don't know if everyone will have access to the Lucid chart, but if you want it, just ask for it. So let me start with some screen sharing. And then we'll start with a handbook, of course. So this is our data stack. And what that means is this is how we get data from the source systems to reporting. So on the left, you see all of the different kinds of source systems that we have, and you can kind of follow it through out to analytics, Tableau, to reporting, or to other things, data enablement, going back to Salesforce, for example. This is the whole thing. You don't need to know other than that this exists and that it's a whole process. You don't need to know anything else really about it. I just wanted to lay the foundation that we're going to be talking about a piece of a larger process. So specifically, we're going to take a closer look at the data warehouse. And so that's the Lucid chart that I, linked. This is kind of like zooming in on that one square. So the main purpose of the data warehouse is to take all those source systems and then transform them and prepare them in a way for reporting. That's it. That's our primary function, is being able to have the data in a state where it can be reported on. The more cross-functional it is, the better. The more conformed it is, the better. All of these things. But that's why we have a data warehouse, is to support reporting. So we have all of these things, all these pieces to help support that and make it easy and efficient for us to do it and help standardize things. So just to kind of walk through the various layers. Again, this is all for context. We kind of have a staging layer. This is really just the first entry point from a source system. This is where our standardization begins. We start renaming columns. We start fixing data types. And if it comes in as, say, a JSON object, we'll flatten it out. And then we kind of have this preparation layer. And sometimes this can look messy. Sometimes this is complicated. But that's okay. This is, I was like, the nice way I tried to put it is, it's transformation in motion. These are like maybe pit stops along the way, or ways we can start combining things. It can be very dynamic, very erratic perhaps, but this is also where we first start applying business logic. When we know that table A is always going to be connected with table B, we need to make sure we can propagate that downstream. This should be like our generic, very generic kinds of business logic. Then we kind of move into the model layer. This is like the primary product, if you will, of the data warehouse that is to facilitate that reporting. We have the enterprise data model, the common schema, where we have a bunch of work to put everything together, to conform it so that it can talk across different feature sets, different data sources, to answer the questions that we have available. There are other data models that we're working to build out, but like one of the big points here is that this is like where we build the trust. We have validated data. This is where we can support it. So a lot of these tools, like these previous layers, are to help us help the central data team in supporting the models. We need to work and construct it in a certain way so that it's efficient for us to work on it. And then we have the semantic layer, which is maturing now. Before with Sisense, this was an idea. Now with Tableau, it's more of a necessity. So we're working to kind of evolve in this space, but this consists of the MART tables and the report tables. It can also it's also like I mentioned here, like logical constructs, where okay, I can take these model tables, and that is the report table that would be queried, but you don't have to actually have the table in existence. And so you don't have to worry too much about what that means of logical constructs. That's just more of like a bookkeeping and documentation side part from our side. But the semantic layer, report tables and MART tables, is what connects to our reporting, so to Tableau. And as Israel pointed out, this is kind of where, as what we have seen in the past, as analytics teams jump into working in DBT, this is where they start to take ownership. This is where they can have the greatest impact on their reporting, on their work, is by creating the semantic layer tables that they need. And some of them can be very straightforward. Some of them can be quite complex. One more piece of the data warehouse that I want to make sure to point out is the workspace. This is primarily intended to be for like in-process development, discovery, rapid iteration. It's there so that you can build models. You can have that under version control where it's then everything can start with an MR, kind of to really conforms well to the GitLab culture of working together. It can be a very collaborative space, but it's never really intended to be the end goal. It's always the intent from us is that you build it in the workspace. You're like, okay, we got this. Now let's plug it in where it goes in one of these other layers, because you can work on anything in the workspace and it will just kind of slot into one of these other layers in the future. So that's a big info dump. I'll pause.
Can I ask one question? Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, just before you go off of this picture, is there like another box kind of on the far left side that would be the raw tables? The only reason I'm asking about raw tables is like one thing that comes up a lot with analysts at our end, where we're working in a MART table or a common table, and maybe we're working with Salesforce data and we're really familiar with what we have in Salesforce, but we don't see that field in the MART or in the common table. And so there's a thing we do to go check, like, oh, did it make it into Snowflake at all? Go look in the raw tables. Yep. And then I never use any of the layers in between. I'm like, if it's in the raw table, we've got it. All we have to do is bring it up into the tables that we're actually trying to use for reporting. Right. So yeah, when I was looking at your picture, I was like, I don't think you have raw on there anywhere, but I think that is kind of like off to the left. There's a reason for that. I'll hop back over here to the data stack. This is kind of where we get into that logical construct. There's this thing called a data lake. Oh, okay. And gotcha. So like the S3 buckets, the GCS, file storage, the raw tables,
those are in the logical construct of the data lake, where data goes and sits. It lands there, and we don't do anything else to it. As soon as we start transforming it, we bump into the data warehouse. It's a logical construct. It's both in Snowflake, one's in the raw database, one's in the prep database. So like that's why I'm calling it a logical construct. You can see it as a physical difference because it's in raw and not in prep or prod. But yes, you can go directly from those things directly to the semantic layer or directly into a workspace table. But I'll talk a little bit about in my next little section about why these other things are important, and knowing that they're there and knowing when to use them and when it's okay to bypass them. So I'll talk about that in a second. Is there any other questions on the data warehouse?
Yeah, the report tables, because we've been saying like, okay, sales, like you can make a report table that'll power, instead of having the SQL in Tableau, put it in a report table. So is that in the semantic layer column, or is that one down from the semantic layer column?
That would be in the semantic layer. So anything right now that we would prefix with mart or report, we would logically say that that is in the semantic layer.
And I think, like, maybe this is clear already for you, Malia, but like, I think the challenge that we had previously was that the workspace was being used as the de facto semantic layer. But what this would do now is, like, if the semantic layer report tables are based off the EDM, it's kind of still based off of the source of truth.
Yeah, and then with the semantic layer, Malia made a point that take discounts, for example, and we want to land a report discounts, for example, and just being careful that we just have one SSOT for report discounts for that semantic construct. And that comes down to just exercising our collaboration value, having DRIs. So who is the DRI for discounts? And really working with that person. It's Vikas in this case, I believe, but we'd have to double check. But really working with our collaboration values and DRIs for the metrics, who needs to be consulted, and then there's an extra governing mechanism on it that those models can't be merged in unless there's only 5 people in this whole company that can actually merge something into that semantic layer. It's me, Peter, Miles, Shushma. Well, maybe it's more. The analytics engineers and I'm not even in the merging business anymore. So it would be Miles, Peter, and Shushma. Shushma covers GTM and finance, division of labor. Miles is covering R&D, and Peter's covering people and engineering and like a backup. So then it would be up to Shushma, like, hey, Shushma, like it's our job as maintainers of that semantic layer that we ensure SSOT. And then that becomes a process thing of just process and people, making sure that we got that going good. And in a way that, in theory, even if the person wasn't the DRI for discounts, they could say, hey, everyone can contribute. I want to make a contribution to that discounts model. Who's the DRI? Vikas. Hey, Vikas, hey, I think it should be this. I'm assigning to you as the DRI. What do you think? It should be able to work like that with GitLab, the platform, data ops. Everyone can contribute, maintainers, code owners, DRIs, process, people, collaboration value. If all those things are working, this can work. Yeah.
Are there any other questions on the data warehouse? Okay. One thing I want to just again highlight is kind of the intent of business logic. I might have my little arrow here. Talks about how specific the business logic should get. The prep and model layers can be really heavy in business logic. Semantic layers, the more specific it is, the less of it there should be. I think like our design intent, our philosophy here is this should be like, I am filtering to this specific event type or this opportunity type. That's the difference. I'm going to make a report table that is going to add a filter, and that's only for this report. I want to be able to filter earlier, but I'm actually going to lock in a specific filter in a report table because I will only, on this report, I'm only ever going to be looking at this. And so we want to apply the ability to filter earlier, but the actual filter application should happen as far down as specific. We consider that kind of like a very specific business logic. This report wants to only look at this event type, for example. That's a very specific piece of business logic. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a little bit because the next bit, I don't have graphics specifically to carry me through the next bits. But I'll start sharing again in a minute when we do the demo. So my next section I called, what do I call it? Query to model. All right. So some of what helps here is the history of DBT. DBT was designed for analysts so that they could be empowered to create and manage database tables, the database tables that they need. So at the root of it, it is designed that if you know SQL, you are 90% of the way there. That's all you need to know from a language perspective in order to use and build a DBT model. Now, there are steps that the extra 10% is DBT, is craft, is things that you need to know how to use the tool. But it's not that complicated. So I want to lay that groundwork first, is that it's just SQL. Everything, most of what you're going to see in DBT is SQL. It enhances things. It uses templating and some Python to make things work programmatically. And so that's the gain from it. We're not just keeping a bunch of raw SQL files. This tool, we integrate this tool into it so that it does other things. So that's what the tool is from a kind of process standpoint. This is also where we start implementing things like standardization. Why? Why do we care about standardization? Well, the simple answer is it makes everyone's lives easier. You might have a favorite way of writing SQL, the way you've done it for years. And that's great. But I don't really care how you write your SQL. But when you bring SQL into a model that is under version control that 10 other people might have to go and touch or play with, or even just read, we want a standard way the SQL looks. What does that do? It lets people speed run through what it is. Like, okay, I know I don't have to spend time translating SQL. I know that when I look at a DBT model, the SQL will look like this. I should be able to find this here, or find the filters here, or do this here. We don't have to have an argument about leading commas or trailing commas. You don't have to, people, they can write it however they want, wherever they want, except a DBT model. I guess I kind of lean back to you can have the Henry Ford Model T. You can have a Model T in whatever color you want, as long as it's black. You know, you can write SQL however you want, as long as it's the way I tell you. So there's just an important factor of standardization. Where does this get applied? We talked about those different layers in the data warehouse. We apply our standards in all of those top layers of the data warehouse. In the workspace, we don't. Our only requirement in the workspace is that the model executes. Because if it starts crashing and throwing errors on it, we're going to turn it off. That's it. That's the requirement. It's like, we don't want to have to be triaging a bunch of errors because someone put up unfinished SQL code. Like it has to run. So that's, again, leaning towards that fast, rapid iteration. We're not imposing standards, structure standards, style standards, any of that in workspace for those reasons. But it's also for those reasons why we don't want those to end up being like the source of truth for things. Those are supposed to be in process things. Like, yeah, it's notes, it's in process, it's messy, it's okay. And so that's why like standardization helps. That's important to remember as we start moving into contributing to those other layers. It is more work, but that work has a purpose. It isn't just writing a SQL query. It's learning this 10% that is the craft, the tool, and it's learning how the process works so that other people can contribute more easily. So the next piece I want to kind of talk about is a little bit, if you put development on a spectrum, you can start with something as simple as copying, pasting a query into one of these files. So if you have a query that runs, it can be a DBT model. Copy, paste. It works. Now, can be severely limited. It can be very brittle if you just copy and paste in the query. The tool, if you start adapting into the tool's way of thinking and way of modifying the code, then it can become more robust. Or the biggest one, for example, is dbt will keep track of the relationships between tables. So if you write a query and you directly reference, say, the dim date table, that's fine, it'll work, as long as certain conditions are met. It's always running in the right database. The table doesn't change or something else doesn't change about it. We don't move its schema. But dbt allows us to put in a reference. We say, hey, reference the thing that we call dim date. And now it's more flexible. Now it will run in your local environment. It'll run in a CI environment. It'll run, because all of these have different fully qualified names for the same table. And so that's like the first stage. You go from raw copy paste, very brittle, but it works. It'll execute in the right places. The next easy stage is just all you do is replace these and use references. You're replacing table names with basically a Python function. That's it. And that's all you need to do to have a robust, I mean, even in the workspace, we'll stop you if you don't use references. If you just put in a query, we're like, hey, wait, this is likely to break. So like just replacing the table names with this reference function, that's the bare minimum. That's all that is needed to be done in the workspace. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a little bit. But if we go on that spectrum, we have this copy and paste of a query. We start moving along, just replacing the references is very close to that. You're going to go all the way through like conforming of style, conforming of structure, optimizations, and you're like looking at things like integrations and conforming across tables. Now, those latter ends, that's where the analytics engineers on the central data team work primarily. We're working to make things work across tables. We're looking to minimize tables and combine things wherever they can. We're looking for optimization. We've worked in it enough. The conforming of style and structure starts to become second nature. Like that's where we start, and then we kind of work on from there. So you're not expected to know the full structure, the full style guide, how to optimize the query to run well in dbt. Those are things that are good to know that they exist. But you also don't have to worry about them too much at the beginning. I mean, do your best to write a good query as best you know how. That's all we can really ask. I'll give you an example. I'll show an example here in a minute of where I was able to help someone take their query running from like 30 minutes down to 2 minutes. By just restructuring and you adopting a different way of doing it. And then the last piece I want to talk about kind of for this section is the difference between model modification and model creation. I don't know if any of you have ever dipped your toes into any other kind of programming, but tweaking someone else's code for most people is often way, way easier than starting from a blank piece of paper, right? Open up a file editor and like, okay, I'm gonna write my model. Can be really hard and challenging, frustrating even. But opening up someone else's work and going, I think I just need to change this, tends to be more approachable to many people. I can't speak for everyone. I know I feel that way. I saw Nahil nodding her head. And I'm going to walk through a quick modification of what that looks like. But this is also where I go back to reference. If you know SQL, you're 90% of the way there. Because all you're doing, if you're going in and modifying something, is you're just modifying a SQL query. So theoretically, if you can get the SQL query to run outside of dbt, you should then know how to make the edits to the existing query to get it to produce the same result as your query. And that's the simplest, easiest way entry point into working with dbt is copying out the query that dbt is already doing, pasting it into your normal query editor, and then fiddling with it until it gives you the result that you want. And then you say, okay, what did I change? And then you go in, you open up an MR, you make those changes. So don't be afraid to edit something. As Israel said, there's only a handful of people who can commit a merge request, who can finalize a merge request. So you won't break anything. You can't. We won't let you. Well, you will. We will miss stuff. You'll break stuff. We all break stuff, though. I mean, I break stuff. Michelle breaks stuff. We all break stuff. But we do our best. Everyone's on a different level. But my point there is you don't have to be afraid of breaking stuff. We will catch most things before they are tragic. You can query it on your own. If you start building out into local development space, you're completely isolated. Even if you, as we walk through, like using the CI jobs, they're completely isolated. If you mess up a calculation, you accidentally divide ARR by 0. That's not going to make it into the thing. People will look at it before it gets merged. So please, if going into this, please experiment and explore. Go ahead, Israel.
Yep, I was going to jump in and to echo what Peter was saying as he was describing the modeling. In that semantic layer, the analytics engineers have already prepared that data in the common schema and have done a lot of that, that dense modeling work to create that product, that first layer, the dimensional model. And then when our functional teams are engaging in that semantic layer, like 75% of that stuff is done. Like it's much less you have to deal with in the semantic layer. And then so what a lot of times what'll happen is sometimes is maybe that first semantic report model you make, maybe there's an extra step for an analytics engineer to kind of optimize and push some of that logic down into the EDM. And that's okay. Malia and we talked about that. Maybe the first report model isn't the ideal one, but it takes that first step and it puts it into the semantic layer. And the cool thing is about you all contributing is you all are closer to the business. Like once you define that semantic layer and what we need there, that's brilliant. The rest of it is more of a refactoring exercise, optimization. But that interface of the semantic layer and the business on this side, and then that core EDM, and just kind of you all contributing to that semantic layer, huge help, huge help.
We would be working with you to build those report tables anyway. And so one of the ways I've worked in the past, even here, is I had an analyst hand me a query that says, this gives me the table that I need. I look at it and go, great, thank you very much. And I come back to them in 2 days with a completely rewritten model, ready for DBT, efficient, all these other things. And it gives them, columns might be renamed. There might be a few extra columns for administrative things, but I can say, great, thank you very much. Here's your table. And now you're off to the races. I think most of our analytics engineers will be happy to work that way. If you have a functioning query, you've already built it in a report, say back in Sisense, you hand it to them and says, I need this as a report table, please. That's part of the services, if you will, that we offer. Is like, yeah, well, you've done all the hard part. Now it's just sitting down and writing code.
That's an excellent service, by the way. You guys are great at that. One thing I want to add just before we go on to the next thing about the semantic layer, specifically for Francesca, who's brand new, this is her second week. When we're starting out writing those SQL queries, in an ideal world, our queries should only reference the semantic layer. So you're going to look for common mark tables or common tables, and that's all you ever want to use in your queries if you can. If you can't, if the field you need isn't in there and you've got to go off to the raw table and find it, that's when we want to, bring it up to the semantic layer. But keep that in mind when you start out. Just try to do everything from those tables if possible.
And I'll put in another plug here for the analytics engineering team. If you're looking for a report table and something in a semantic layer and it's not there, ask us. That's the key to say, oh, I know it's in the raw table. I need it in a report table. That's where the analytics engineering team is like, I need to do this work for you. That's like our primary function, is to get that from the raw table to the semantic layer. So by all means, if you figure it out, you've written the query, you've even made a workspace model, none of that's a problem by any means. Everyone's welcome to contribute. But it's more of you don't have to feel alone that you have to do it yourself. Those kinds of things we should be able to prioritize heavily and quickly. It's like, oh, we have a new column that is in the source table and it needs to be in this report table. Those are the things that we should be prioritizing. again, one of our primary functions. I can't speak for that. It will always be prioritized at the top, right? Business moves at the speed of business, but do not think that you have to figure it out on your own. You do have a central support system to help carry that through.
Yep, and ideally, spin up an MR, make that report table assigned to one of the code owners, and they can review it.
Yeah. So just as a point of reference, I'm going to, on some of like the standardization and how it can help, I do want to give one example. I was helping Max and Sarah with a DBT, with a Tableau data source model. And I looked at it, it wasn't running, things were really slow. And I looked at the custom SQL query that was driving it. And maybe this kind of thing is familiar to you. This is a 2,000 line SQL query. I'm just scrolling through fast, don't expect to read it. I'm kind of thump the desk kind of thing. It's like, this is a very big and very complicated SQL query. And it was taking, sometimes it would fail on extract refreshes. It was just long, complicated. When I tried to run it locally, I didn't even wait for it to finish. It was too long. It was working too hard on something. I was examining everything I could. Like, why? So what I did is I took a little bit of time out of my other stuff to help them. And all I did is first build the model. I plopped it in here and I adopted a certain style, a certain structure where we take all of the tables that we want, that we're going to use for a query, and I bring them in at the front. If you're familiar with any other programming languages like Python, where you import your libraries, that's a good analogy, where it's like, I'm going to bring them in. Snowflake is smart enough to only use the columns that are used. So bringing in a select star of all of these tables doesn't hurt our performance. But this is a structural standard that we've adopted. And all I did is go through, first thing I did is I went through and replaced all of the references. So if I come down here now to from, I'm not querying the qualified name of the database table. I'm querying that other construct, that other construction is CT, common table expression, if you're not familiar with it. So by doing that, and then the only other thing that I did is remove subqueries. So it had sub-select statements and sometimes sub-select statements. I pulled all those out to be, again, a common table expression and filtering it the same way. And now this runs in under a minute. I didn't change the logic. I didn't change how complex this query is. I just changed the way it was organized and the way it was structured. So I just want to use that. I'm not trying to throw shade on this. I'm not trying to say that this is a bad query. They're doing what they need to do. They're getting the answer that they need. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's more of to impress why our standards and structures are valuable, and why we say, no, this needs to change before we can accept the change. There's a good reason for it. We have good backing. Okay.
Wait, before you go to the next thing,
Yeah.
those reference things you added.
Hmm.
So I think you're probably going to cover this later, but I get what that's doing inside of DBT. One situation I've had in the past where I feel like I'm doing something that's kind of dumb and inefficient is I go in DBT, I look at this big long query, there's something tiny I want to change about it, but I need to test it first. So I copy paste this out of here and into Snowflake. And then to get it to run, the first thing I have to do is go back and remove all of those reference tables, which is dumb. So I'm wondering, is there a better way I can do that? Maybe that's where you're doing it locally instead of like straight in Snowflake, because that's like not efficient, obviously, to have to go back and change every one of them back to like prod, common, dim subscription, whatever.
Right. And so this is what it was when I was copying, pasting things in. And I do this. I will keep both of them here while I'm in development sometimes. So that
that's actually really helpful, because then you know what it is.
Swap back and forth. I know what it was, and then at the final stage, I'll clear out these things as comments, whatnot. There are other ways, like you mentioned, local development, running it locally, means I can leave the references in, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. The other way, and this leads right into my next section, actually, will be to come to the documentation site, and I'll be using this table here in a minute. But we see here, okay, we're going to select from, and here's our reference. The DBT documentation site also has the compiled version of the code that automatically replaces those. So if I compiled code, copy to clipboard. Now you don't have to replace anything. Now, when you want to go back, you have to know what it is to go back. Usually it's just the table name. You just reference the table name and it works. Aliases kind of fiddle with that a little bit, but that's, if you're going from DBT to a query, you want to get started with those little tweaks. That's the simplest way, is you just come here, find the table you want to edit, go to the compiled code, and then copy it out, and you can paste it into a query editor, and it should work.
Is it gonna
Thank you.
undo
That's awesome. I never even clicked on that compiled. I've only
Now
ever
you know
looked
what
at
it's,
the
now you
source.
know.
Is it gonna undo things
And-
like the group by equals n equals 12? Like, is it gonna undo that into group by 1 to the resident? It'll do that?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
So anything, when you go click on compiled, anytime you see these double curly brace, the compiled version will resolve those, because these are functions, basically. It's templating. And so anytime you see those, so if you like the n equals 21, group by n equals 21, it'll resolve that, and it'll say group by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 21. That's what the compiled version is, because the compiled version is what DBT sends to Snowflake. The source is what you write. And so all of these things are there for our simplicity, or to add some programmatic capabilities into SQL. Okay, so demo time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a column to an existing model. I'm going to do that in the web IDE. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So I have this table, SQL queries. I need a new column. There is don't worry about what it is, but I actually need to do this. So I thought, well, what's a better time to do this? There's a column in another table called bytes scanned. And in fact, if I navigate to the primary source table for this, which is, where'd I go? Sorry, query history source. I can come down here and I can find my bytes scanned. Bytes scanned is somewhere in here.
Row 46, I think you just passed
Thank you. I had it earlier. So byte scanned, I know it's there. I know the column's there. I don't have to touch this table, but I know I need this column in my other model. And I know I'm missing. And so the easiest way to do that, if I know that this is like the prototypical, archetypical, whatever you want to say, simplest change you could make to a DBT model. I'm going to go and find that same model in the repository. Now, this is the Snowflake queries. And there's a whole training we could give just on navigating the project structure. You can kind of figure it out from the DBT docs where it should be in the project structure. There's a few modifications to it, but it should follow this structure generically. So you find that in the repository. So here's the same table. I need to add bytes scanned to it. And you can just come here to edit and open in the web IDE. I'm going to go back and get my column name. Make sure I'm a terrible speller, so I'll rely heavily on things like copy and paste. But so here I am in the GitLab web IDE. And I know the column is from my Snowflake query history source. Okay, I'm already selecting start. It's already available to me. So I've renamed this to be source. And it looks like I'm just pulling in source here directly. So all I should have to do is come up here. I've added my column. Make sure I don't have to continue to add it somewhere else. Nope, the next thing downstream is just another select star. So that's it. That's all I should have to do. Okay, so now I come over here and I don't want to commit to master. I want to commit to a new branch. I don't have to give a branch name. That random branch name is sufficient. All right, it's going to pop up and it's going to ask me if I want to create an MR, and I do. So, and then I just say I'm adding a good message as to what the MR is. There's actually a template that we will want to use for almost all things, and it's a DBT model change. This is a long, and there's a whole DBT change process that we can go over in detail. The point of it, though, is for communication. And so if I just say, what is the scope of this? Adding new column for reporting. I'll go in and enhance that discussion, in a little bit. That's not the major point of this exercise. So I'm going to create the merge request. So I've written a query, I've modified a query, but I haven't actually run it. Like I said, even in the workspace, which this one is in, I still have to know that it runs. Here, the diff clearly tells me what I've changed, but I need to know that it works. And so for that, we have set up the pipelines. This first stage is creating a whole new set of database just for this MR. So when I was talking earlier how you can't break something, any of the changes that you run here are isolated. There is a whole new database stood up just for this MR. So we can change things, we can have permissions. It's completely different from what's happening in the production database. And once this is done running, I will have the options to build my changes. I'm just waiting for this to hit. All I have to do is hit play, but while that's happening, are there any questions so far?
I feel like I've done it up until this point.
Mhm.
And this is kind of like as far as I've gotten. Like I make the merge request, this is what I want to add. And then that's usually where I hand it off to somebody. So I'm interested in seeing the next steps. Keith, have you ever done this before?
I've
Do you
actually
do
never
this?
done this. I've never
Okay,
done
all right,
this.
good.
Okay.
Okay.
So now we're forging into new territory. So this used to be a lot more options, and those options are still there, but we've simplified it so that all you have to do for like 80% of all changes. So since this is a simple change, this should capture then that 80%. All I have to do is come over here and hit run on build changes. Now what that's going to do is run through a set of pre-prepared step sequences of events, and it's going to build that model. We can watch it for a minute, but we don't have to. I actually have other stuff we want to get down to, but this is supposed to be simple and direct. There are edge cases. If this fails, you will have to learn why it failed, and maybe you need to tweak something. But what this is doing is running through the necessary steps to build that model, with the intention that if all you did is hit play, and this comes with a green back with a green check mark, you're good. There's a whole deep pool here that we are skimming the surface. But to get started, that's all you need to know. Hit play. And if it fails, start asking questions. There will be some helps. There'll be some information in this log, this terminal view of the CI job. Don't be afraid to look at it. Don't be afraid to read through it, try and figure it out. I don't know how we're going to go right now. There's a few sequence of events, and I want to kind of touch on one other thing. Maybe we can come back to see how this works out. But once that is done, so if we go back to the MR, there's testing that we should do in the workspace. It's not strictly necessary, but it's always a good idea to have tests. We want to run tests against the data that was produced in this database. You might have run the query before, but this is a whole blank new database. Did it work there? So we want to try and run the queries against that and test that. And then you can ask for reviews. You add reviewers, and they're going to come through these checklists. There's a whole bunch of references. If you get stuck on something, or if you need more information, or think, hey, wait a minute, this feels like it should be different. And this is where all the reviews happen. These MRs you're all very familiar. I do want to quickly show you what it can look like locally. So I'm going to take this branch name. I'm not going to walk through how to set this environment up, but know that we have a process for it. So this is VS Code. running, on my local machine. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to check out that new branch that we just made. So I'm in that branch. And then what I can do is go to that model. And get oriented here. Models, workspaces, data, Snowflake queries. So here I am locally, and I have now my bytes scanned. Okay. And I have my database set up. I have all these other things set up. So I can just simply go through and say, build. And these are, we can teach you this syntax. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I write this regularly and copy it. But I'll walk you through what each of these things are in a second. I know we're at time. Again, oops, that's not the button I wanted. That's not the button I wanted either. Sorry, and now I'm getting flustered because I'm running out of time. All I'm doing is pasting in the name. So I'm going to build this model, and I'm going to what's called defer to the reference state. So any tables that I don't have that I need to build this will be built will be used from somewhere else. And so then what I can do now is I can execute this. It will run, and then I have a separate database with which I can query. It's a prefix with my username, and so only I have access to it unless I give access to somebody else. And so it can be that simple to use DBT locally or in the web IDE. But yeah, I won't worry about the results. I'm going to go and finish this off camera, if you will. Are there any questions quickly before we run out of time?
So the questions will arise when we start doing it. I feel like
Yes,
that was one of
I
my
assume
questions.
so.
Yeah, and what might be helpful is Malia, Key, Francesca, when you all have a use case that you're ready to tackle, maybe what we do is a working session, a pairing session where we just schedule another 30 minutes, maybe bring this same group back together, and then you share screen, Keith or Malia, Francesca, share screen. First time it's always like, okay, how do I do this again? So share screen, and then maybe we try live and practice, and that could help.
And can I make a suggestion? Because I think there was actually one good use case that came up recently, which was the competitive intelligence dashboard. So
Yeah.
if I can share my screen quickly, like to talk a little bit about when we looked at the data source for it. So I just came to Lineage and said, show custom SQL query. And this was our indicator that this might be a good candidate for a report table, because it's always like such a great feeling when you go through a query like this and you see it's coming from common. So exactly like you said earlier, Malia, I was like, okay, everything's coming from common. That's great. It's just, as Peter said, it's more specific. It's a filtered version. So it's got all of these filtered. It's limiting which opportunities we're looking at. And then I did scan to see, like, is there business logic that's being applied here? Usually case statements can be business logic. So I just scanned quickly, like, as Israel was saying earlier, maybe this competitor's GitHub flag complete is something we would want to push earlier in the process eventually, but to make this first iteration, it's fine to put it in the report table. And I think I just saw that case statement and a couple of others, but this looks like a perfect candidate for a report table. It's all based on the EDM. It should fit right into the semantic layer. Maybe it would be a good
Yeah,
topic.
that's great. I'm signing Natalie up. She's not here, but that's her query. Maybe actually Natalie and Francesca can do that together, try to make a report table, and then we'll call you guys up when we get stuck. If there's anything we can't figure out. I think that's a super awesome first try use case, since we've already got a running query. We've already got a Tableau dashboard built on it. And then there's one more step, right? Like they make the DBT table, report table, and then in Tableau, instead of having that custom SQL query, you need to point your dashboard at that table. And you should get exactly the same answer, I think, right? Okay. Yeah, I think that's
Run through checking the table, make sure it's all the same thing, modifying the data source to use that. Yeah, there's a whole sequence of steps. One thing I'll put in here finally as a plug, You can always ask questions in data channel. There is a DBT developers Slack channel. You can ask questions there. There's DBT users from all over the organization. I individually, you can find this on the data program calendar. I provide office hours for technical questions like this every week, 2 different times, an early time and a late time for me. Should be an EMEA friendly time at least. If you need that, someone needs that. But I'm there to help answer questions. And if you put that in the agenda, I can do some homework beforehand and help out where I can. So, and then in addition to that, if you're looking to get onboarded and you just need someone to walk you through how do I get DBT set up locally, or how do I do this one thing, feel free to reach out to me and we can try and schedule some sync time if I can't answer the question directly.
I also have some tips when you guys get there for like switching over the Tableau, like switching the custom SQL to the Tableau data source, because all the fields will need to be replaced. But you can
Yeah.
like kind of like cleverly rename them so that maybe they'll just come over automatically. Still iterating on them.
Okay.
I have some tips.
Yay. Okay, good. This was awesome. Thank you so much,
Mhm.
Peter. We really, really appreciate you taking the time. I feel like this is like a super great introduction to like not only DBT, but also Snowflake and how everything's set up and where to look for things and how to write your queries. And like, we got a whole lot out of this beyond just the DBT part. So really, really appreciate that. Thanks.
I'm glad to help.
Awesome job, Peter, as always.
All right. We will talk soon. I think we'll make that our first try and reach out to you guys when we need help.
Yep. Don't hesitate to reach out. As soon as you get stuck, you take 30 minutes, can't get unstuck, phone a friend, you know?
Okay, cool.
We're here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.